So you were saying, we'll recap really quick. You were saying that you started with, you believe that Buddhism is sort of antithetical. Almost scourging was the word you used, and then I added that
Yep.
that I believe it's the interpretation of Buddhist teachings that has led to this place where it can be very detrimental, or even almost like, I don't know, just not really leading to anything beneficial. And so then I also mentioned that the mainstream's interpretation. So you said you wouldn't say it's the mainstream's interpretation of Buddhism, and you were going to explain that right now.
Yep. So now that we're recording, to clarify, my understanding of Buddhism and because it's related, Hinduism is very limited. It's only as much as I want to know. It's only as much as I need to know. One of the basic principles that I disagree with in practice, but I accept in conceptually speaking, no one's free until we're all free. I think that that's a good stance to take, right? So
Yeah,
far
I like
so
that.
good.
I like that. Yeah.
No one's enlightened until everybody's enlightened. So far so good. This idea that we reincarnate and we need to focus specifically and solely on ourselves to generate that karma and reach enlightenment over the period of several lifetimes. I take more of a pagan stance of like a neo-pagan stance, I guess. We have no idea of whether or not we will actually reincarnate in the spiritual sense, in the cognitive psychological sense, but we do know that epigenetically we will reincarnate in some way, shape, or form. So we have this one life to do everything that we can to benefit the world and the people in that world, which will inevitably over time increase and raise the level for everybody over time. If you operate under the premise that you have to accomplish all of this in one lifetime versus over the span of 10 lifetimes or however long, I think it makes you a lot more empathetic, a lot more personable. Um, it really it allows for individuals to transcend socioeconomic class or status and class. I suspect that a lot of the people who get into Buddhism are from the middle class and above, or they had very reasonable um, life backgrounds. And so they operate under this premise of they need to do 10 years of meditation. 10 years of meditation that an occultist would say, dude, this you could do this in a week. You could do this in a month, probably. And these people instead take thinkers, well-meaning people out of society for ungodly amounts of time, and then when they reintroduce them into society, they can't function. They're disconnected, and frankly, I don't find them very personable or helpful. And so, if we're operating under the premise that no one's free until we're all free, how are you going about achieving those steps? I
So
think you and I had this conversation previously. I would
yeah.
rather see I'd rather see 100 people at 1% versus 99 people at 0% and one person at 100%. I'd rather see everybody raised up incrementally rather than having one person reaching enlightenment every 10 years or what have you. And furthermore, it does not seem to me that the state of enlightenment, as we were previously discussing, it does not seem to be all that complicated or difficult to achieve. It seems to me that simply the concept of the word has been lost. And when people reach that state of being, they don't necessarily have the vocabulary to identify it. Uh, Beyond that, it seems that enlightenment will happen in stages. And so another criticism is that uh, this sense of enlightenment that you see spoken about in Buddhism and Hinduism through yoga, again, you could probably do all of it in a month, and you don't have to dedicate your whole life to that. The reason I find that important is it's the same thing as the sign of a there's a quote, and I don't know who said it, and I don't actually know the exact quote, but it's something
Mm.
along the lines of a good chess game is a sign of a well-rounded man. A chess master is a sign of somebody who's wasted their entire life, something like that, because they
Okay.
dedicated their life to just chess, and that's not all that there is. And now you have that guy who's really, really good at chess. There aren't a lot of people you can share kinship with. So instead of getting really good at chess, why not try to teach everybody the game of chess and then just get everybody incrementally better?
Okay. There's
Something like that.
a lot to dissect here, and I really
Yeah.
like it. So let's go back to the very first premise, which was um, nobody's saved until everybody's saved. I believe that this is a great mindset because even and I compared the interpretation of Buddhism with the interpretation of Christianity, because when we're talking about religion, uh, it's all about saving. It's all about saving
Yep.
yourself, saving the other, and then like Jesus saved us, he sacrificed himself and to atone for our sins, etc. I have never felt in line with that way of thinking, because it's like that makes no sense to me. And I'll explain, because um we are all responsible for the actions that we take on. And
Yep.
so for a religion to say, for example, you will save yourself only if you adhere to our religion, then what's the point of me adhering to your religion? And it puts you in a place where there's no other religions that can save people. People can't save themselves. They need the, what's it called, the indoctrination of the church. Would that be the correct word? They need the permission from the church to say you're saved. So it's, and then I could see that similarly in like Buddhist, and with at least interacting with people, and whoever is watching this, if we do post it, it's like first off, my understanding of Buddhism is very limited, and so in the same way as you, Paul, also with Hinduism. But what I see is that it becomes this thing of enlightenment is the goal, and so you want to reach that, and so you will do everything in your power to achieve that. But I see almost a disconnect between the pursuit of enlightenment and also the pursuit of a grounded approach to life, basically. So it's like, and I see it also kind of in the new age, where a lot of people disconnect from physical reality to become enlightened, achieve psychic awareness, etc. Um, so then I will say that I think a big issue is that people are approaching it from a very self-centered point of view, and like you said, it's like nobody is saved until everybody is saved, and unless we can think about that, it will always be a selfish pursuit. And so then that will in itself already be a way to, like you said, it takes away from life rather than give to life, rather than promote the evolution of humanity, I believe. And yeah, so that was the first point. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, so I mean, in regards to the Enlightenment thing, I mean, at least from, and I can't speak for every occultist, but it really does seem to me that, so somebody like the Buddhist or the yogi, in the case of Hinduism, their whole life goal is to achieve enlightenment over the course of 50, 60 years, however long. Um, Enlightenment seems to be step zero. Step zero, you can't do anything for until you reach it for the occultist. Um, so you really want to get that out of the way. You want to figure it out and handle it and maybe not necessarily master it, but generate an awareness and generate the ability to replicate. Because again, I think that enlightenment is it's a cyclical process. Um, it might be a state of being, but it also might be um, an action or an activity, in the same sense that meditation is. We think of meditation as like sitting in a lotus pattern or whatever, or doing yoga. You're looking at the activity rather than meditation as the state of being. And so we misconstrue those ideas as being one, whereas they're separate. You reach the state of meditation by doing all these weird body movements or humming or chanting or whatever. You don't have to do all of that to reach that state. You could do that through literally anything else, if you know how, if you've practiced it. Um, Shit, what was I gonna say? Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's another criticism, that it really does seem like the so-called enlightenment and wisdom, even for that matter, all of this stuff is actually quite easy to achieve, quite easy to
Yeah.
um,
I want
attain, utilize.
right. I want to ask you about that because it's almost I've talked about enlightenment and I've done some research, not too much, but just looking into what do like teachers say is enlightenment. And I was reading one of the books, The Science of Enlightenment by Shinsen Young, and he was putting enlightenment in the same way, similar way as you are right now, where it's like a state of being, and it's not reserved for just like a specific kind of person, this like yogi that goes out, leaves society and sits and meditates. He really points to it being something that is is able to be utilized by everybody, and there's actually a science like there's a step by step
Yeah.
to being able to achieve it. And the way I relate it through my personal experiences, um I believe that there I mean, first off, like if I was enlightened, I might as well be dead. First off, like I don't know. I feel like if I was enlightened the way that popular consensus says, I think I would just be dead because I wouldn't be in this physical body. I wouldn't be experiencing duality. I would just be back to source. So I think if that is the
Mhm.
if really at the core of enlightenment is really just being tuned in to your to source, being tuned in to truth, to love, basically, then we can achieve that right here, right now. We can bring that into our current reality. And so one of the quotes that I remember was that it was saying that uh, I think it was like a great test to see if you're enlightened. It's like you can achieve enlightenment outside of society, etc. But how do you interact with the daily things? Um, I think that it was like the story of this Buddhist. He came back to society, and then having to implement those teachings into society was actually very difficult because you're dealing with people. It's like the simple interaction of dealing with a stranger can be so easy to throw a person off of that state of enlightenment. I think it points to a very important thing, that I think that the arena for achieving enlightenment isn't going to be reserved for those people. At least in the past, that's how it was, reserved for the monks. But I think now it's going to be the true test is going to be how can you bring that state into everyday life. So interacting with people and being a loving person having compassion, having patience. Um, those things are actually very hard to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to, again, more criticism of Buddhism. If you've had a Buddhic monk go off into retreat for 10 years or so, or however long, because I don't actually know enough about that, but for however long, um, and you bring them back into society, like you said, what use are they to society? Um, at all? Are they going to be able to have a normal paying job? Are they going to be able to feed themselves? Do they have a house to go to? Are they going to just stick on welfare for the entire rest of their life? What end outcome do they actually contribute to? Okay, so you've meditated for, let's say, a year. What came of it? What are you going to do for others now? Now that you've experienced this, what can
Right.
you do? What can you do? And
That's
I
the there's a story of the Bodhisattva. That's another term that's often used, and I think I really like that term, which is the one who has achieved enlightenment but chooses to come back to the world and serve the world through their teachings, their learnings. Have you heard of that term before?
um yeah, maybe, I think. Is that like one of the steps before reaching like actual um because Buddhism is in stages, correct? Like you go through levels or what have you.
Yeah, let me. I actually just looked it up right now. So, a bodhisattva is a key. Bodhisattva is a key concept in Mahayana Buddhism and refers to an enlightened being who has attained deep spiritual insight, but chooses to remain in the cycle of birth and death, samsara, to help others attain enlightenment. The term itself comes from the Sanskrit words bodhi, meaning enlightenment or awakening, and sattva, meaning being or essence. Um, yeah, so that's
I mean, that
interesting.
that to me seems like that should be the whole goal, right? The idea isn't to reach because my understanding is anybody can become Buddha's a title, it's a state of being, right? Something like
Right.
that. There's no one. Buddha's not a god. He's the Buddha's a title of somebody's reached a certain state. Um, I mean, that to me seems to be what the real goal should be. The goal shouldn't be to reach a state of being. It should be to reach a state of being and to keep going and help others reach that state of being. Um, I think purely from the creative and mischievous uh, sort of stance that comes with my personality is that to me just seems like cosmic comedy. If you could have everybody reach their full potential, what would a world look like if everybody was on the same page? Um, and I think it would be hilarious to me. Um, I'm not really motivated by standard morality. I look at human achievement as comedy. It's comedy, it's art, um, it's dance, it's a lot of things.
Hmm.
And so, this idea that uh, no one's free until we're all free. Well, what would the world look like once we're all free? Um, Now, I'm not necessarily sure that uh, it would be good because I have a lot of suspicions and a lot of evidence to suggest that something like the state of enlightenment. Um, okay, so why do you hear about occultists going insane all the time, but you don't hear about Buddhists going insane all the time? It's because of that very rapid. Um, you're doing this in like a month rather than 60 years or however long. Um, Enlightenment does not seem to be uh, ontologically positive or healthy or productive or anything of the sort. But it does seem to be a useful state of being and potentially um, a meaningful state of being to achieve. In the sense that if you don't achieve it, then you're always just going to be half baked. And so, if you wanted to see who you truly are, were, what you could be, something of the sort, then yeah, you would want to do that. You would want to pursue that state of being or something of the sort. I don't
I'm
know.
kind of I'm kind of curious when you say you can achieve it in a month. Okay, so the way I interpret that and the way I can say that is I would say, for example, the flow state is it's a beautiful state to achieve because it really opens your eyes to what you are capable of as a human being. And so um I think the state itself is being able to just enter the observer and become almost like completely detached from everything around you. And I think enlightenment, one of the traits is freedom from suffering. So suffering can only exist within duality, good versus bad. So I believe that if you take on responsibility and you face all their fears and you realize what's going on in your life, um, through facing them, you are able to almost, it's like you learn the lessons within it. And at the end of the day, you realize that when you're facing your fears, the best approach to take on is one of detachment, where it's like you detach from the ego, you know, and that allows you to see things as they are as versus the interpretation of your ego, and that will allow you to solve a lot of problems. So there's almost a utility to to this enlightened state. And so when you say, okay, so you can achieve this within a month, I think it's best that people look into their lives and don't try to escape their life through enlightenment, but rather approach their life through enlightenment. So how can your life become the arena for you to become an enlightened being? And that's really the question that people should be asking, I believe, because the moment I started to ask myself that was the moment that everything changed for me. It's like I had to understand what were the chains and that were holding me back, and also what was the key that I held to break free from all of that.
I think, um, being that this is a recorded call, but also just purely for conversation between you and
Yeah.
um, I think that it might be important to define terms. Like we're discussing words like wisdom, enlightenment, what have you. Well, what do those words actually mean? Because you brought it up in the sense of that this can be done in a month.
Right.
I think it dawns on me that I haven't actually explained what it is that you're trying to achieve or what can be done in a month and why that's even possible. Um, I think you and I had previously discussed the concept of Carl Jung's shadow being connected to this sense of enlightenment. What is enlightenment? Um, well, if we look at the word itself, it's to bring light to something, to illuminate. One of the aspects that I would find fundamental to this sense of enlightenment, at least the way that I'm utilizing it, and seemingly what is somewhat popular in the occult sense, you do shadow work. You can't you can't reach your full potential if you don't even know who you are fully speaking. And so that part of that would be enlightenment. Another thing would be self-actualization. You master pretty much your day-to-day life and you master who you are. You fully identify your personality. Um, you're aware of internal processes, what have you, right? So that wouldn't be shadow work, but it is still illuminating aspects of yourself. So that would seem to be part of this so-called enlightenment. Um, you would probably want to figure out. So meditation is important, or meditative practices, which will lead you to the state of meditation, as we had previously discussed. That's important. The reason I think that is um, when you take an individual and you put them in a dark room, so it's quiet, it's dark, if you repeat that over time, eventually they'll be able to understand what are their actual thoughts and feelings versus what's just external stimuli impacting the subconscious mind. And so you misconstrue the subconscious mind and external stimuli for things that are actually organic and native to the self. So again, you're illuminating something. It's just different from something like the shadow or something like your hobbies or your personality. So you're illuminating all these things. Um, and I think if you go down the line, go down the list with all of this stuff, if you do all those things, then yes, that will lead to a sense or a state of enlightenment. Um, and then you would have to repeat that and maintain it. Actualization
Yeah.
is not a one and done thing. Actualization is a process, and that's a daily thing. Are you reaching your full potential? Are you being who you are? That's a process. It's not a state of being so much.
Yeah,
Um,
I want to also add, for example, so I looked up enlightenment, like what's the definition. So here it says it refers to a profound state of awakening and self-realization where one gains deep understanding of the true nature of reality, existence, and the self. It is characterized by the end of ignorance, the cessation of suffering, and the liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Enlightenment is a state of complete wisdom, inner peace, and compassion, and it varies in definition depending on the spiritual tradition. So, I remember for myself, who was just beginning, the end of um. See, it says here the liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. I think that uh, I didn't truly understand what that meant because I didn't understand what death was or what birth was. So even within the definitions, there are also it's also very important for a person to think about the way that they define these things. So so I think one point that I want to just add, and we're gonna have to end the call soon. So um, it's what I from my understanding, the way I see enlightenment is it's a state that I can reach because I understand the nature of reality. For example, like we talked about earlier, everything just is, and then we construct our reality based on interpretations of what is. So whether somebody can be in a bad mood, but just because they're in a bad mood, does that have anything to do with me? Or even are they in a bad mood? Like, am I judging the situation right? So maybe that's just a moment in time that will go away and disappear. And because that's what it is, everything is just that, right? So I believe that enlightenment allows you to operate from a much more efficient perspective, um and it allows you to suffer less. And by suffering, I mean, well, not being tied up into your emotions, not being driven by anything outside of what is love, peace, um stability. And so enlightenment, within when if you see it from that perspective, it's not too far out of reach to the common man, especially.
so actually, one of the things that I did forget to bring up, but you kind of just reminded me. Um, yeah, we often hear the word love associated in relation to enlightenment, love, compassion, what have you. Um, I would encourage you to read on the definition and the context of agape love. There are a number of different Greek words for love. Actually, one of the first things that I wrote uh, that generated a lot of traction kind
Yeah.
of discussed. Uh, there's agape, there's philia, there's eros. Uh, there's one that I don't actually know how to pronounce, storg maybe. Um,
Oh, I'm looking at them right now. Storg.
yeah, yeah, something like that. Which is like the
Yeah.
love for your country, which is a very different love. The love for your parents is a very different love than a love for a lover or a friend. Uh, all of these words we use the English word love to mean the same thing, essentially. And we have to use context clues to figure out the differences in those definitions. But agape love seems to also be integral to the sense and state of enlightenment. And I think that because it goes back into what you were previously just mentioning, you need to be in a state of acceptance. And there aren't good things, there aren't bad things, there are just things. And I think that you can really only reach that through a state like agape. But read up on the idea of agape, and then I want you to look at the story of the flood and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, because I suspect that those are also acts of agape. And if that's the case, then going back to previously what I mentioned, I'm not actually sure that enlightenment is as positive, happy, healthy, what have you, as a lot of people seem to think it is. Um, if you can justify something like Sodom and Gomorrah or the flood as an act of pure love, then I mean, you have precedent to justify a lot of things. Um, I don't know, like you very, very quickly, this becomes not spiritual and it becomes actually incredibly gritty with academic psychology, philosophy, ethics, particularly, um, particularly Malthusian ethics. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like it just does not seem like enlightenment is actually uh, understood all that well. But if it is, then going back to the Buddhism idea, um, then it would be 100% in line. It would be incredibly dismissive. It would be incredibly dehumanizing, which it all seems to be. And if that's the Buddhist understanding of enlightenment, then that makes sense. They're not here to what did you say? What did you call it? Bodhisattva or something?
Bodhisattva.
Something like that, right? Um, then that's not the goal. The goal is to remove themselves, and that to me does seem selfish. Um, but anyways, yeah, I mean, overall, uh, enlightenment does seem to be like a fairly, once you break it down, depending on the person attempting, depending on how much time, effort, ability they have, the level of understanding, it could probably be done in a month, or at least very close to it. Um, or at least it gets the ball started, so that passively over time, maybe 3 years after that initial start point, then yeah, they've probably reached something very close to this state of being. Um, but then again, it comes down to what do these individuals actually want to do with that state of being, and what can they do at that point? Um, I think it does make it you very disconnected from other people. Ego death. Now that I think about it, that's another part of enlightenment.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
big part of the community. People really talk about that. I mean, yeah, I think that there's a good place to end, because this was just a little recording done spontaneously, but yeah, we'll leave it at that for now.
yeah, man, totally.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording, and then we'll just say our goodbyes too.